A Vegas man is found at a local apartment complex shot to death. Now a trio are locked up accused of his murder after authorities say the group lured the man for sex with the intent to rob him, and during the scheme he was shot in the head. The case unfolded on July 19th, shortly before 8 p.m., when police responded to a Vegas apartment complex to reports of gunshots. When officers arrived, they found a man lying in the parking lot unresponsive, with blood gushing from his head. Police say they identified the man as 19-year-old Conner Rebolledo, who, when authorities found him, was holding a gun with his finger on the trigger. Officials pronounced Conner dead at the scene, and the coroner's office determined his cause of death to be a gunshot wound to the head. During the investigation, a resident in the apartment complex told police she was in her apartment in front of an open window when she saw Conner walking with a woman, when suddenly 3 men ran up and jumped the 19-year-old. The witness recounted all 3 of the men beat Conner, and one of the men had a gun and used it to pistol whip him several times. The witness said the woman stood nearby and did nothing to defuse the situation and ran away once bullets flew. According to police, during the fight, the man who pistol whipped Conner shot him 2 to 3 times. After the shooting, the 3 men ran off in different directions, with one of the men running to the woman who was with Conner. After police were alerted to the suspect's description, a plainclothes Las Vegas Metro PD detective in an unmarked police car went to the apartment complex when she noticed that behind her was a car following the same path through the complex. Police say as the detective continued to drive, she noticed a woman and 2 men who matched some of the physical and clothing descriptions of the suspects walk into the parking lot and wave her down as they appeared to be in a hurry. The detective reportedly realized the group thought she was a rideshare, so she continued driving and saw them enter the car behind her. So police followed the car and detained the occupants, which included 22-year-old Nathan Nava, a family member of his, and 23-year-old Skylar Bailey. Nathan Nava reportedly told police that he and the mother of his child, Skylar Bailey, were hanging out at a friend's place who lived in the complex with some other people when Conner showed up. According to police, Nava claimed 2 of the men at the apartment said Conner owed them money and wanted to rob him, but Nava claimed not to want to be a part of the plan. Nava claimed that the 2 men jumped Conner but said he never actually saw a gun. So Nava then asked his relative to send him and Bailey a rideshare to pick them up. When it came to Skylar Bailey's account, she claimed to have met Conner a month before the shooting at a party and reportedly told police she was walking with Conner when the man ran up and jumped him. But when authorities spoke to those who knew Conner, it would lead them to piecing together more clues that would help crack the case. When detectives spoke with Conner's mother and girlfriend, they said on the night of his murder, Conner received a text message and told them he was meeting a friend and would be back in half an hour. And that would be the last time they saw him alive. Investigators also spoke with Conner's co-worker who revealed more. The co-worker told police that Conner was messaging a girl on Instagram by the name of Emily and was waiting to meet up and hook up with her. According to the co-worker, Conner and Emily were supposed to meet on July 16th, but Emily canceled. Then they were supposed to meet on July 18th, the day before Conner's murder, but Emily canceled after claiming to have gotten a flat tire. But the 2 would ultimately reschedule for July 19th, the day of Conner's murder. When police searched through Conner's, Nathan Nava's, and Skylar Bailey's phones, they found messages between Bailey and the Emily who Conner was messaging. Authorities confirmed Emily was 20-year-old Emiley Ridout, who authorities discovered was Skylar Bailey's sister. When investigators looked through the messages between the sisters, police said it was apparent that Nava and Bailey were going through severe financial difficulties and had been evicted from their home with their children. On July 2nd, Bailey and Ridout texted each other about Conner's Instagram, with Ridout saying, "Okay, already done, like I unfollowed you and removed you." And Bailey responded, "He got me blocked," and sent a screenshot of Conner's Instagram. On the same day, Ridout sent a screenshot of her conversation with Conner saying, "Only for y'all," and Bailey responded, "We win, you win." Then in another conversation, Ridout asked her sister, "How you know he even gonna have the money on him?" And Bailey responded in part, "He likes to look flashy and show off." Police say from July 2nd to July 16th, there was constant communication between Conner and Emily and Bailey. Authorities say there were even instances where Bailey typed out messages for her sister to copy and send to Conner. Then on the day of the murder, Bailey instructed her sister to no longer reply to Conner because she was going to take over and text him directly from a different number. When police went through the messages between Bailey and Nava, their messages would seemingly show a pattern, as it appeared that Nava had a history of robbing people dating back to 2023. In one of their messages, Nava reportedly said, "I promise this month over, I'm going hard, baby, no more robbing." In a text thread on July 16th, 3 days prior to the murder, Nava texted Bailey asking, "Is he talking to you?" And Bailey responded, "He's checking his messages," as well as, "I love you too, my stomach in knots." The day before the murder, Nava and Bailey were texting each other asking who they could borrow a gun from. Then on the day of the murder, Bailey texted Nava the address where Conner was later killed. Police uncovered more messages between Nava and a person under his contacts named Spaz Out, where Nava messaged him, "Bro, can you grab Ka already?" And he trying to link and everything, bro. Police say the messages went on to say he just came back from the casino. And he got bread though, bro. He just came back from the casino. Police say they are still investigating the identity of Spaz Out, but they believe that person is also one of the people who conspired with Nava to rob Conner. Police say they later learned Conner worked at a business that refilled ATMs. While reviewing his Instagram, police noticed he regularly posted photos with large sums of money, which they say was consistent with Bailey's description of Conner being flashy. But when detectives spoke with Conner's manager, he said the manner the money in the post was packed was the same as how the money is packaged before being put into ATMs. Conner's manager told police he previously told him not to post those photos because he could become a target for a robbery. Nathan Nava, Skylar Bailey, and Emiley Ridout were all arrested and charged with Conner's murder, as they now face charges of open murder, battery with the intent to commit robbery, and conspiracy to commit robbery. All right, we have a lot to break down in this case, so joining me to discuss it further is former prosecutor Melba Pearson. Now, Melba, thank you so much for joining me. To me, it seems like prosecutors may have a lot against the defendants here, especially when it comes to the conspiracy aspect, given it seems all three played a role in this murder. What are your thoughts about this case and about all three kind of playing into this murder as well too?
Sadly, we've seen cases like this before, where often you'll have a group of people, usually several men and one woman, who would be basically the bait in order to entice someone for the purposes of a promise of a date, a promise of a relationship, and then unfortunately, at the time of their date, the person ends up being robbed. And of course, when you plan a robbery, lots of things get out of hand very quickly because you don't account for the adrenaline, you don't account for the reaction of the person, you don't react to how slowly the person may pull out their wallet or how quickly, or maybe they don't have money on them. So when all of those things come into play, it's very easy for what was supposed to be a simple quote unquote robbery end up escalating to the point of homicide. And so, incredibly tragic as this is, it is not that uncommon. But clearly, the defendants have given the prosecution a great deal in terms of the text messages. I mean, there's a treasure trove of information in terms of their planning, in terms of even one of the defendants feeling nervous and that they're only doing this because they have love for this person and that sort of thing. So, there's going to be an uphill battle for the defense to try and say, well, they didn't know what was going to happen. The only argument I could see could possibly be for the one defendant that actually served as bait, saying, well, I didn't know a homicide was going to occur. I only signed up for a robbery. But again, that's not the best defense because of the fact that you have agreed to commit a felony. And if a death results in the course of that felony being committed, you are now on the hook for the homicide as what we call a principal, the same way as the person who pulled the trigger.
And investigators noted that Nathan Nava and Skylar Bailey were experiencing financial hardships. Do you think they intended to set up this robbery truly just for the money? And if so, why do you think Skylar allegedly dragged her sister into it? Because in my mind, I'm thinking, how much money did they truly believe they'd be able to take from the victim?
Well, I think there were a few things that came into play here. The victim had a job refilling ATM machines and apparently would post on social media photos of him doing his work. He, at the time, had said it was more so to show how the money was packaged and sort of the day to day in the job. But unfortunately, as his supervisor had indicated previously, this is the type of thing that opens you up to be a victim. So Of course, it is not his fault. He didn't ask for it, but that those sorts of posts made him a target. So I think there was definitely the money option, the money concerns drove this. I think she probably brought her sister in because of the fact that, whatever relationship she had with the other defendant, she may have thought her sister would have been more appropriate to be that bait, so to speak, in order to entice the victim to his robbery and eventually death. So I think money was the driving factor. I just think that they lost control of the situation once they got there and it resulted in a homicide.
And now all three defendants have been charged with open murder in addition to the other charges. What is the difference between that charge, open murder, as opposed to a first degree or a second degree murder?
So in Nevada, they have a very unique statute which allows for a prosecutor to charge open murder. And what that means is that it leaves it up to the jury to decide what level of murder occurred. So the jury could come back and say this was first degree premeditated murder. They could come back and say, no, this was more of a second degree murder, or this was more of a manslaughter. So it's an interesting way of presenting the facts to the jury and letting them decide what the intent was. Was there sufficient intent to substantiate a first degree murder, or was this really just a second degree murder, or was this just basically part of some other thought process based on the evidence that was brought forth. So I think that's incredibly interesting because normally you see prosecutors like to be able to at least say, we have enough for first degree murder. And then what normally you would see happen is that they would have what they would call a lesser included offenses. So that gives the jury the opportunity to say, well, you charge this as a first degree murder, but we don't know that you've met that burden, but you've given us the lesser included offenses of second degree murder and manslaughter. So it's, I guess, accomplishing the same thing, but just in a different way. Basically, the prosecutor is saying up front, pick which one, as opposed to the prosecutor coming in and saying, I think it's this, but giving the jury the option to downgrade if they think is appropriate based on the evidence.
And given the facts of the case that we know right now, do you think it's possible that maybe one defendant, if the case goes to trial, if a jury convicts the defendants in this case, do you think it's possible that jurors could convict maybe one defendant on first degree, another defendant on second degree, and potentially the other one on manslaughter? Do you think that's possible in this case?
Yeah, I think it's possible, but I don't think it's likely because of the fact that they all seem to be so deeply intertwined in the planning based on the text messages, and that they all sort of came to the table with a common understanding of what was going to happen that night. While nobody may have necessarily planned for murder, at the same token, they planned to get a firearm, and all parties knew that a gun was involved. So it is a very logical next step that you're bringing a gun to a robbery, there is the possibility someone may get shot or killed. So I don't necessarily see a difference in the culpability per se, except for the fact of who actually pulled the trigger versus the other two in their planning. But I don't see that there'll be much daylight in between the level of convictions, if there is a conviction in this case, the level of convictions between all of the defendants involved.
And the way in which the victim died in this case was truly horrible. But in the arrest report, police noted that the victim was found dead holding a gun with his finger on the trigger. Do you think that a defense attorney could argue that any of the defendants felt that their life was in danger, given that, potentially the victim may have had a weapon as well, too, with the finger on the trigger, and maybe, given they set up this robbery scheme and lured this victim to this apartment complex, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that any defense attorney could argue that because the victim had a weapon as well too, that maybe the defendants in a way felt their life was in danger?
Well, the thing that comes to mind is the old adage, don't start none, won't be none. And so to translate that into legalese, you can't claim stand your ground or self defense protections if you were the instigator of the situation. So if you started the fight or if you started in some sort of criminal conduct and now you're confronted with deadly force, you can't say, well, I had to shoot my victim because they weren't complying with my illegal requests, right? So I don't see a scenario where the defense can make an issue out of that. They will try, but I don't see an avenue where they can do so successfully based on the fact that the victim was protecting themselves against the wrongful actions of the defendant. And it just, unfortunately, in this scenario, the victim was not able to effectively protect themselves.
And it seems as though there were a lot of different hands beyond the three that were arrested and charged so far. But do you expect more arrests to come in this case? And if so, do you expect them to be charged with open murder as well, even if they weren't physically there, but just communicating with the defendants through texting?
I think it's possible that more arrests can result, but I don't necessarily see anyone else being charged with open murder. Because, for instance, I'm thinking of the person that provided the gun for this to all happen. Did they know what they were providing the gun for? Is all going to bear out based on the text messages. It might be just very cryptic, like, "Hey, we're just gonna, I need it for protection," or I'm gonna do something. Don't ask questions. Okay, the person turns over the gun. They shouldn't necessarily be responsible for murder because they didn't know that that was what the plan was. And so they may be charged with some other firearms offenses, but I don't know that they'd necessarily be charged with murder. Now, if there's other people that played a more active role in the planning or maybe try to help them in the aftermath, maybe dispose of evidence or something along those lines, again, I could see more charges resulting from that. But again, how much did they know and when did they know it are going to be the key questions in determining what level of charge is going to be filed.
And Melba, do you expect this case to even go to trial? And if so, do you think that it's possible? We have three defendants here who could be co defendants all in this case together, but do you see any of them maybe flipping on one another, especially given the two of them are half sisters?
I definitely see this case, or at least several of the defendants, pleading out. I don't see a scenario where all three are going to want to go to trial on this. Now, do I see sister turning against sister? It's possible. When it comes to rushing to the courthouse steps, the adage of blood being thicker than water kind of goes out the window with that. However, I could see that both of the sisters maybe turning on the boyfriend, on the male defendant, on the shooter in this case, because again, they can sort of pin him as the mastermind and say, well, we just had to agree, or we felt that, it was just easier to go along with it, whatever the case may be. But I could see a scenario where they end up testifying against him.
All right, Melba. Well, thank you so much for giving me your insight into this case. Before we sign you off, is there anything else you would like to add?
No, just that again, it's something to think about in terms of vetting whoever you're going to go out on a date with or whoever you're going to meet up with. Again, that idea of meeting for that first date in a public place and, always having your wits about you and making sure you're in a familiar area. So if you have to flee, that how to be able to get in and out of the area that you're in. So again, it's just about having that common sense and safety when it comes to dating or interacting with, various people as we go through life. It's a sad reality, but that's where we are.
At this time, all three remain in custody. According to online court records, the trio are all scheduled to appear in court on September 17th for a preliminary hearing. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.